This story turns social assumptions into its sharpest weapon. The men in the shop see age, gender, and silence, then mistake all three for weakness. What follows is a brilliant reversal. The woman they dismiss is revealed as someone who shaped doctrine, trained elite shooters, and survived the darkest corners of military history. It is a gripping reminder that power often arrives without spectacle and that society is trained to underestimate it.
A woman with gray hair, wearing a simple canvas jacket, handled the rifle like an extension of her own body. She moved with purpose, without a hint of doubt or a need for assistance. A few young men nearby began to laugh, mocking her age. They told her she should try a smaller gun, one more fitting for a grandma. She paid them no attention at all. Her movements were clean and economical. She inspected the chamber, made the weapon safe, and checked the action. Then, in an incredible 11 seconds, she took apart and put back together a rifle that would baffle an average person. The clerk's condescending smile disappeared. One of the men fell silent. His gaze was fixed on her hands, noticing the faded scars and the undeniable expertise in every motion. "How did you know the twist rate of the barrel?" he asked. She offered no reply. Just then, the door to the back office opened. The owner of the shop walked out, saw her, and froze. "Byrne, is that really you?" The entire store went still. Who is this mysterious woman? Tell us where you are watching from in the comments. If you enjoy stories about unsung heroes with incredible hidden gifts, we would love it if you would subscribe. Your support helps us create more content. The owner's question was about to expose a secret she had hidden for years, bringing a past she believed was long dead back to life. The sun rose over the Montana plains at 5:30 in the morning. The gentle morning sun filtered through the curtains, revealing an immaculate room. Her bed was made with the sharp, perfect corners of military discipline. Beside it, a woman with her gray hair in a braid counted under her breath. 1, 2, 3. She descended into a push-up, her back straight and elbows tucked in tight. Her form was flawless, without a single unnecessary movement. At 68 years of age, Lori Byrne completed 100 push-ups without pause or tremor, her rhythm perfectly controlled. In her kitchen, the only aroma was strong black coffee. There were no sounds of cooking, no radio, only the soft sound of a mug set down exactly 2 inches from the edge of the sink. Standing, she drank her coffee while staring at a closet across the room. In the corner sat an olive-drab footlocker of military design. It was secured by a combination lock whose numbers were smooth from countless touches of her thumb. Every morning for 7 years, her fingers had moved toward that lock, but they always retreated. A faded green paracord bracelet on her wrist looked worn from time. As her coffee cooled, she absently traced its familiar knots with an expert touch. There should have been another one. A long, long time ago there was. Her jaw set, she downed the rest of her coffee in 3 quick gulps. Outside, she read the sky for the forecast, ignoring the phone on the counter. The high clouds drifting eastward signaled an afternoon wind shift. This was a skill learned where weather reports were a luxury and survival depended on reading the world around you. That knowledge, like so much from her former life, remained with her. Her truck's engine turned over instantly, its rumble filling the crisp air. She mentally counted the 43 paces to her door, a habit ingrained in her, assessing distance, acting on intuition, identifying escape routes. Her old training was a constant, silent companion. The Ridgeline Diner had been a fixture on Main Street for 40 years, only its name had changed over time. Lori reversed into her usual parking space, ensuring a clear path to the road, a holdover from her past. Inside, she claimed the corner booth, which gave her an unobstructed view of the entrance. Ruby appeared with her coffee, no order needed. "A little early for you, is it not?" "Same time as every day," Lori replied. Ruby just smiled, familiar with her friend's brief replies and unwavering alertness. Lori scanned the doorway, the reflections on the glass, and the other customers. 3 streets over, a car's backfire shattered the morning calm. Lorai's coffee cup did not so much as tremble, but her gaze sharpened instantly. Her free hand slipped beneath the table for 3 seconds before reappearing to grasp the mug. Ruby discreetly looked away, a silent ritual they had shared for 7 years. Her breakfast arrived, prepared exactly as she preferred. Lorai ate with intense focus, each movement precise and deliberate. A man at the counter observed her briefly, intrigued by the quiet woman who seemed so separate from everything. He returned to his meal. In a small town, a lot of folks had histories. Prying was not the local way. It was an unspoken rule. By midday, Lorai was driving her truck east on Highway 89. She needed to purchase a new rifle. The barrel of her old one was shot out, the rifling worn away by thousands of rounds of practice. It was how she maintained her edge, a set of skills few people her age possessed. The only gun shop within 90 miles was Black Ridge Firearms, a place she had put off visiting for months. It was located in a strip mall, an enormous flag flying over the entrance. Through the window, she could see the afternoon crowd was almost entirely young men. She noticed men dressed in tactical gear, sporting logos she had learned not to trust 2 decades ago. For a solid 2 minutes, she sat with her hand on the door handle, steadying her breath. This was just a purchase, nothing more. A bell rang out as she entered at 3:47 in the afternoon. 3 men examining scopes glanced her way. Dressed in a simple jacket, jeans, and work boots, she clearly did not fit their scene. A younger man, holding a high-end rifle case, nudged his friend and grinned. His companion glanced over, let out a soft laugh, and went back to looking at optics. Lorai approached the sales counter. A young employee named Jay was stacking boxes of ammo. He offered a polite, rehearsed smile. "How can I help you, ma'am?" "I would like to see the Remington 700 PCR, chambered in .308. Jay's smile faded for a moment. "That is a highly specialized piece of equipment. Are you certain you do not want something simpler?" "I want the Remington 700 PCR, she repeated. Across the shop, one of the men called out, "Probably wants it for deer season." His buddies laughed. A muscle tightened in Lorai's jaw, but she remained facing forward. Jay seemed uneasy. "We have got some excellent choices for recreational use," Jay suggested. "They are lighter and have a softer kick. Perhaps it is a gift for your grandson?" "I do not have a grandson." "Oh. Okay then. I will go get that rifle." He disappeared into the stockroom. The trio of men moved in, congregating by the knife case to stare at her without hiding it. Tyler, the one with the expensive case, observed her more closely. Something about her stance was different, her balance, the way she occupied her space. He recognized it from combat veterans, but this woman looked to be nearly 70 years old. It did not add up. Jay returned holding the rifle, a matte black tool designed for long-range accuracy. He placed it on the counter gingerly, as if she might break. Lorai lifted it. Her hands moved, with a life of their own. She inspected the chamber, cleared the weapon, tested the trigger, and checked the scope rails. Her fingers moved with a proficiency that Jay could only dream of. There was no doubt, no fumbling, no need for instructions. The store fell silent. Her fingertips brushed a minuscule mark on the receiver. It was a nearly invisible engraving, LB97. They were her own initials. That was the year she advised on the original design. Her breathing became shallow, just as it did when she saw a face that resembled a fallen comrade. Tyler drew nearer, his gaze locked on her hands. He was finally seeing them clearly. He saw their practiced economy of motion, a faint scar on her right hand, and the specific callus on her left forefinger that only comes from one thing: the barrel's rate of twist, Lorai said quietly. "Is it still 1 in 10? Jay was speechless. "Yes. How did you know that?" "And the feed ramp has been altered. That is a custom modification." "That is not listed on the specification sheet," Jay stated. "How could you possibly know?" Lorai did not respond. She put the rifle back together in a flawless 11 seconds. Her movements were spare and perfect. Setting it back on the counter, she met Jay's gaze with eyes that contained a history he could not begin to imagine. From behind her, a new voice dripped with condescension. I bet she thinks minute of angle is a new kind of yoga. This time, the laughter was louder and bolder. The man, Derek, was wealthy, and his new pastime gave him a sense of power. It was clear he had never faced a genuine threat. Tyler was already on his phone, his face shifting as he scrolled. He was searching obscure forums, corners of the internet unknown to most. There were legends of deniable assets, ghost operatives from an era before digital trails. His eyes flicked between Lorelei and his screen. A different customer nervously handled some ammunition, accidentally sending a loaded magazine clattering off the counter. It dropped. Lorelei moved with fluid grace, not alarm. She caught it after one bounce, expertly cleared it, and set it back, resuming her position. The entire sequence took barely a second. It took just 8 seconds. Her movements were pure muscle memory, polished by countless hours of practice. The entire shop fell silent for a beat. Derek's obnoxious voice shattered the stillness. Nice little parlor trick, Grandma. You pull that one at bingo night? A few people chuckled nervously, but Tyler was not laughing. He was focused on his phone, putting the pieces together. His buddy Brock leaned in. Dude, what is up? Tyler's voice was hushed and grave. There were legends about the first women operators, long before they were ever officially acknowledged. The story seemed impossible. Perhaps it was. Tyler studied Lorelei's hands, seeing the faded scars and rough calluses. He saw how she stood, perfectly aware of her surroundings without seeming to look. See for yourself, he urged. Brock looked, and his grin vanished. Lorelei met Jay's gaze directly. I want this one. Excellent. Let me just grab the forms. Jay shuffled the papers, clearly rattled by what he saw. This woman was not who he thought she was. Could I please see your license and permit? She produced the papers from her jacket. Every document was in perfect order. Derek moved forward, emboldened by the small audience. He figured it was safe to make fun of an elderly woman here. Ma'am, with all due respect, perhaps you should stick to gardening. This is a serious piece of hardware for experienced professionals. At that moment, the stockroom door flew open. A man in his mid-50s emerged, holding a clipboard. This was Garrett Vance, who had owned Black Ridge Firearms for 12 years. You could see a Marine Scout sniper tattoo on his arm. He still carried himself like a soldier, even after 2 decades out of uniform. His gaze remained fixed on his paperwork as he spoke. Jay, call the distributor on those sites. We are showing 0 in stock, and I have 3 people waiting. Then he looked up and saw Lorelei standing there. The clipboard slipped from his hand, scattering pages across the floor. The color vanished from his face before a dark blush replaced it. He went from relaxed to bolt upright in an instant. He uttered one quiet word, burn. Lorelei's eyes met his. In that moment, 23 years melted away. Garrett was suddenly back at Fort Bragg, facing an instructor who could outshoot men half her age. He recalled her incredible precision, a silent skill that humbled even the best shooters. He remembered the whispers about where she came from and where she was going. No one was brave enough to ask her directly. Her own team knew some things were better left unsaid. He covered the distance between them in 4 quick steps. The crowd and their foolish remarks were forgotten. He stopped before her, his tone heavy with a gravity they had never heard. Ma'am, it is an absolute honor. The shop became dead silent. All the snickering ceased instantly. Derek's jaw was on the floor. Tyler's eyes were like saucers. Brock's head swiveled between Garrett and Lorelei, trying to make sense of things. The air was thick with a respect he had never seen from the easygoing owner. Jay stammered, Boss, you know her? Garrett's focus never left Lorelei. How long has it been? 23 years, she said calmly. The sniper competition at Bragg. Lorelei's voice was steady. 2001. You mean Panama? Garrett nodded, the memory clicking into place. Right. Panama. My God. He turned to the others, his voice sharp. All of you, listen up. He gestured toward Lorelei. This woman was in combat zones before you could walk. Chief Petty Officer Lorelei Byrne, retired. Navy Special Warfare Development Group. Tyler's hands trembled as he read from his phone screen, his voice barely a whisper. Lorelei Byrne. Covert Ops from 1979 to 2001. Trained Marine Scout snipers. Oversaw the M24 rifle trials. Consultant for precision fire standards. She was. He trailed off. His eyes darted from his phone to her, then back again. You were part of that unit. One of the first women. Way before anyone knew. Lorelei said nothing. Her expression was a blank slate. A skill learned when showing emotion could get you killed. Brock's voice was a low murmur of disbelief. That is not possible. Women were banned from special ops until 2016. That was policy. Garrett's reply was curt. Officially. The word hung in the air. Derek's face went pale. His cocky assurance was gone, replaced by the sickening weight of his mistake. Chief Byrne was in Beirut, 1983, Garrett stated flatly. Panama in 1989, and countless other places that are not on any map. She did jobs we will never know about, for clients we will never name. And she never asked for a shred of credit. He lifted the Remington 700 PCR from the rack, treating it with reverence. This rifle's custom features, the action, the exact angle of the feed ramp. He angled the weapon so the light hit a small engraving. The designs came from field data in 1997 from Chief Byrne's reports. She helped establish the modern standard for these weapons. He offered the firearm to her like it was an award. It is yours. On the house. Garrett, I cannot. His tone was firm but respectful. Absolutely, ma'am. Respectfully, it was always yours. Lorelei accepted the rifle. Her fingers softly followed the engraved initials, LB-97, her signature, her design. A legacy built into the tools of soldiers who would never learn her name. Jay muttered something that sounded like a curse and a prayer. Derek struggled to speak. I had no idea. We were only. Garrett's voice was ice. You were not supposed to know. That is the whole point. Tyler stepped forward, hands shaking and his voice choked with embarrassment. Chief Byrne, I need to apologize. I served in the army. I should have recognized it. I am so sorry that I... Lorelei's tone was kind, completely free of anger. Nobody was ever meant to know. She settled the rifle against her shoulder with a familiar motion, the way a person does who has carried one over every kind of terrain. This was someone who kept people safe in their beds. As she walked to the door, the group parted for her. The men created a pathway without thinking, finally seeing the legend they had failed to recognize. Tyler went after her, leaving Brock and Derek standing motionless, speechless. Outside, the setting sun cast a warm, golden glow. The vast Montana prairie reached toward the distant mountains. Lorelei gently placed the rifle inside her truck. Tyler kept his distance, waiting a few feet back. Chief Byrne, could I have a moment? She stopped, her hand resting on the door handle. I did a tour in Kandahar back in 2019. I have not been the same since I got back. I cannot sleep. I cannot concentrate. The VA is not doing anything, and I feel completely adrift. He took a shaky breath. How do you handle it all? After everything you have done, how do you carry on? Lorelei remained quiet for so long he figured she was going to drive away. A soft breeze whispered through the plains. A hawk called from high above. You find a new mission. Any mission. What kind of mission? Like teaching a few kids who think they already know everything. The barest hint of a smile appeared on her face. Do you know Ridgeline? Yes, ma'am. Thursday morning. Oh, 600. At the county range. I am normally out there alone. A look of shock crossed Tyler's face. "You would really do that? I will listen. That is where you start." She climbed into her truck. The engine turned over, and she pulled away. Her lights disappeared down a road toward a home with a locked footlocker holding a life of secrets. Tyler stood in the parking lot for a full 5 minutes, phone in his hand, his head spinning. Back in the store, Derek mumbles an apology that Garrett ignores. Brock is glued to his phone, his expression tightening as he learns about Tyler. Jay processes the transaction for a rifle, a present for its own creator. Deep within classified government servers, a file on Lorelei Byrne remains, protected by secrets that will never die. It details ghost operations and secret missions. Her work saved untold numbers of lives and shaped history, all from deep within the shadows. As the sun dips below the Montana horizon, Lorelei is on the edge of her bed, staring at a footlocker. She raises a hand slowly to the lock. Her fingers hover above the old combination lock. Inside lies the past. She has protected for 7 years. It contains the fragments of a life spent in secret. It is the sole proof she existed in a world that officially denied her. She decides against opening it. Not tonight. But for the first time in ages, she feels the desire to open it soon, perhaps on Thursday, after meeting Tyler at the range. The idea of sharing her skills, not concealing them, causes her to drop her hand. She lies down on her bed, fully clothed, looking up at the ceiling. She can almost see the eager faces of young trainees. Not all of them came home. The metal band on her wrist was once part of a set. Its twin now rests in a storage box, attached to the identification tag of a comrade who fell in a war nobody remembers. She shuts her eyelids, takes a long, slow breath, and begins counting to 100, a drill from her past. For years, that simple count was her lifeline, a tool for focus that saw her through the turmoil. Thursday was 2 days away. At 0600, she would be placing targets at 300 yards and reading the breeze, readying skills that had been dormant for too long. She expected Tyler to be there, and likely Brock with him. More could arrive, because information travels quickly among veterans. The news was out. Chief Byrne was home and heading to Ridgeline. This was the legendary Chief Byrne, often mistaken for a simple town resident, but she was every bit the person from the tales. Her home was still and dark. A wind whispered through the pines outside. A Montana evening can bring a chill, even in July. Lorelei Byrne lay awake, her mind on the rifle and the marking she had rightfully gained. Her extended period of quiet was about to break. She never sought recognition, yet some abilities need to be taught. Certain lessons are too vital to fade away. Some things can only be learned from people who survived places where a single error was your last. On Thursday at 0600, she planned to be at the Ridgeline Community Range. She would be there. For the first time in 7 years, she would have company. If you know a person with that sort of unspoken fortitude, someone who never asks for praise for a history they cannot share but who holds your deepest admiration, please pass this along. And if tales like this resonate with you, and you wish to support these quiet heroes, we invite you to subscribe. Many more accounts like this are waiting to be shared. Thursday dawned beneath a thick, slate-colored overcast. There was rain in the air, but it would stay away for at least 6 hours. Lorelei arrived at the Ridgeline Range at 0557, precisely 3 minutes ahead of schedule. She prepared the targets at 300 yards, her movements fluid and sure from long practice. She secured the paper, inspected the frame, and set the elevation just right. A wind blew from the northwest around 8 miles an hour. She did not require any device to tell her that. She could sense the shift in the atmosphere like others sense a coming storm. At 0603, crunching gravel signaled an approaching vehicle. Tyler's truck crested the hill, kicking up a small cloud of dirt. He pulled his vehicle up beside hers and emerged cautiously, treating his rifle container with immense respect. His actions were deliberate and deferential. The self-assurance from the gun store was gone. replaced by a profound and anxious respect. He broke the silence. "Chief, I was not certain you would actually come." Lorelei replied without looking away from the faraway target. "I mean what I say." Tyler approached, placing his container on the bench. His hands trembled a little as he unlatched it, revealing a standard AR-15. It was a familiar weapon, owned by countless vets, but truly mastered by only a handful. Lorelei questioned him. "What is your rifle's zero?" Tyler seemed surprised. 200 yards. "I believe so." Her response was immediate and pointed. "You believe so?" He attempted to clarify. "I said it last year, but have not fired it to confirm." Lorelei rose to her full height and faced him directly. Her face was unreadable, but her gaze conveyed her deep disapproval of his lack of readiness. "Today, you will zero it. You will do this every time you come to shoot. Conditions constantly shift, and your zero shifts with them. Assumptions lead to missed targets." His answer was quiet. "Yes, ma'am." Just then, a second vehicle pulled up. It was Brock's, a newer model with costly upgrades. He got out of his truck with a look of hesitation. The container for his firearm was clearly an expensive brand. While he approached, Lorelei observed him and questioned, "Did you come to observe or to fire your weapon?" He replied, "I came to shoot, if that is all right." She motioned toward the range. "Then find your spot, 200 yards." Brock began arranging his equipment with the methodical precision of someone taught by online tutorials. He had a custom firearm, assembled from top-tier components. It was the sort of rig that was visually impressive but required genuine skill to use well. Lorelei's trained gaze swept over their equipment, noting every single thing. Tyler's rifle was dirty. The carbon fouling on its bolt was a guaranteed malfunction. She noticed the screws on Brock's scope rings were not tight. The optic was not mounted properly. She decided to say nothing for now. It would be better to watch them fire first. "Tyler, your turn. 3 rounds, center of mass. Do not rush." He got into his stance, his breaths loud in the morning stillness. His form was incorrect, too stiff, his elbow elevated improperly. He was struggling against his weapon instead of guiding it. The initial round shattered the quiet. With her binoculars, Lorelei noted the hit was 5 inches down and 3 inches right. "Change your hold," she commanded. His second attempt was nearer, but missed the middle. "You are flinching from the kick. Allow the tool to function." His final round landed 2 inches from the center. It was progress. The result was not great, but it indicated he was teachable. Next was Brock's turn. His form was flawless, like a picture from a manual. His first round struck the dead center of the mark. He glanced at Lorelei, a slight grin on his lips, awaiting a compliment. She simply stated, "The wind is still, and your mark is not returning fire. That is not reality." His grin disappeared. Lorelei then went to her own firearm, the Remington 7-100 PCR from Garrett's store. She had already verified its zero and performance. She knew every detail of the weapon she had a hand in creating. She lay down in a single smooth movement that showed countless hours of repetition. "The breeze is increasing to 12 miles an hour," she declared. "The next objective is at 400 yards. The paper was untouched. It remained at 300. Tyler began to speak, but stopped himself. Brock appeared utterly lost. Lorelei shot her rifle. The report was crisper, more defined than theirs had been. Peering through his optic, Tyler witnessed the strike on a metal plate he had not previously noticed. It was located 100 yards beyond the paper. A perfect shot. "How did you know that was even out there?" he asked, astonished. "I placed it at 0545, she replied. Tyler glanced at his watch. "That was before we got here." Lorelei got to her feet, wiping grit from her pants. "I always make sure I am the first to arrive." Over the next 90 minutes, she ran them through exercises that revealed all of their shortcomings. They practiced firing from awkward stances and finding targets against a clock. She taught them to estimate range and wind without digital tools. Her instruction was straightforward and systematic. When Tyler's ragged breathing spoiled his shot, she fixed his form immediately. When Brock's finger paused on the trigger, she showed him the proper method just one time. Around 7:30, other vehicles began to pull in. They were the vets Tyler had reached out to. A man named Marcus, an ex-Marine in his mid-40s, had a focused, uneasy gaze. A woman named Sarah, an Air Force veteran in her early 30s, had a self-assured posture, though her hands were constantly moving. They offered their names respectfully and requested to participate. Lorelei observed them for a second before giving a brief, quiet acknowledgement. By 800 hours, the entire feeling of the range was different. A team of 5 marksmen was now running exercises directed by Lorelei. Her quiet voice held undeniable command. It was a quality not found in manuals or courses. It is forged by guiding people in situations where hesitation means death. Suddenly, Marcus's weapon malfunctioned. His hands locked up. The shift in him was immediate. He was no longer on a range in Montana. His mind was caught in a grim, brutal moment from his past. His respiration grew quick and shallow. Beads of moisture formed on his brow, in spite of the cool air. Lorelei was next to him before another person could move. Her tone dropped, intended only for him. Tap, rack, reassess. You know this procedure. Execute it. Marcus gazed blankly ahead, his vision fixed on a memory. She placed a steady hand on his shoulder, a physical anchor to the present. You are safe. You are not back there. Execute the procedure. His fingers finally obeyed. He slapped the bottom of the magazine. He pulled the charging handle. He reevaluated his target. The firearm was operational. His breathing began to steady. The thankfulness in his expression was immense. Lorelei offered a slight nod. Excellent. Now, repeat the process. Around 8:45, a silver car pulled in, looking out of place next to the pickups. The person who got out was dressed in trousers and a buttoned shirt. Garrett Vance appeared, holding a tray of coffees and a box of donuts. I figured you all needed some fuel, he offered. He set the treats on a bench, but his gaze locked onto Lorelei. He was seeing the woman she used to be, the instructor who revolutionized Marine shooting, the expert who trained the most skilled marksmen. You still teach the old way, he remarked. Lorelei's eyes flashed. It gets results. It always got results, Garrett said. The higher-ups just resented that it was your system. She let it go, turning back to Sarah, who aimed for a difficult 500-yard target. That shot was a long stretch. Sarah's technique was flawed, but her determination was undeniable. Garrett watched for about 10 more minutes. During a short break, he walked over to Lorelei. Can I ask a question? She simply nodded. So, why start now? You've lived in Ridgeline for 7 years, staying completely quiet. What made you change your mind? Lorelei's gaze drifted to the snow-capped mountains in the distance. She looked at her students, who were finally getting proper instruction. I was done carrying the burden by myself. Garrett nodded, understanding completely. He needed no further details. He recalled his own time at Bragg in 2001. He knew the price of that world. He had watched soldiers return, bodies intact but minds forever changed. He knew about the hidden careers and secret files and the memories that were never spoken. If you need anything, he said, the range, gear, just ask. I will, she replied. He left the food and drove off. Lorelei sipped her coffee, seeing her students get better with every shot. By 10 o'clock, it was 15 degrees warmer. The students were weary but intensely focused. Tyler's shots were now hitting in a tight cluster. Brock was now accounting for real conditions, not just what the book said. Marcus completed a full drill without faltering. Sarah managed to hit a target 400 yards out with a short-range rifle. Lorelei called them together. They gathered like students awaiting a teacher's judgment. You are all making the same fundamental error. You are focused on hitting the target. That is not the objective. Tyler looked confused. Isn't that the entire point? Hitting the target is the outcome, she clarified. Your goal is flawless execution. Master your breathing, the trigger pull, and the follow-through. The bullet will find its mark. She raised her own rifle, settling into a perfect stance. She sent 3 quick rounds toward a target 600 yards away. Her cadence was perfect. Inhale, exhale, press. The scope showed 3 holes clustered tighter than a fist. It is not about the target, she said. It is about the process. The hit is just evidence you did it right. Her students stared, completely stunned. Sarah was the first to speak. How many years of practice did that take? 30 years. Every single day. The number hung in the air. 30 years. A lifetime, devoted to a craft few could ever master. You were not just practicing on ranges, though, were you? Sarah's voice was low. It was a statement, not a question. Lorelei met her gaze and realized Sarah knew. She must have been Air Force intelligence, someone who understood the shadow world of operators. Lorelei said nothing, which was answer enough. Just then, Tyler's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, his awe turning to shock. "Chief," he began, "I looked you up online. Most of it is blacked out. But your name shows up in some old military journals. You are in manuals about long-range shooting. You wrote training programs that are still in use today." "I consulted on a few things," Lorelei deflected. "You designed the Marine Scout sniper program in 1997. She gave a slight cough. "I helped with it. Brock now had his phone out. You taught at Special Operations training facilities. You tested weapons for the Special Operations Command. You ran field tests in combat zones. He trailed off, looking up from his phone at her. "You were in Beirut during the barracks bombing." Lorelei's fingers found the paracord bracelet on her wrist, gripping it until her knuckles were white. A thick silence fell over the range, as if the air itself had gone still. Marcus barely whispered. 1983. The Marine Barracks. 241 dead. You were there. Lorelei's breath became shallow and precise, the same control she used for a perfect shot. It was a sign her history was closing in. "I was in Beirut," she confirmed. Tyler's tone was now hushed with respect. "Were you inside the building?" "I was on a surveillance post 1 kilometer away." Her voice was completely flat, a technique she mastered to lock away her emotions. "We heard the explosion and saw the smoke plume. I called it in on the radio before the official alarm sounded." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You saw everything happen." "I saw what was left," Lorelei corrected. "How many did you rescue?" The question lingered, without an answer. Lorelei's grip on the bracelet tightened, the cord biting into her skin. "That information is classified, but you rescued survivors. You ran into that mess." Lorelei faced the mountains, her voice a faint whisper. "Rescue operations in war zones are never publicized. The people involved never talk about them. That rule is still in effect." Brock's voice was strained. "You saved people. I performed my duty. Your duty was surveillance. My duty was to do what the situation demanded." She turned to face them again. Her expression was a blank slate, but something inside had changed. The walls she had built were starting to fracture. Her 7 years of silence were being broken down by their questions. Marcus took a step forward, his usual nervous energy gone, his eyes steady. "Chief, I need to tell you something." Lorelei just waited. "I came here because I have not slept properly in 3 years. Loud sounds send me diving for cover. I cannot keep a job, maintain a relationship, or even feel like a normal human being. I thought that maybe the focus required for shooting would help me. I hoped the discipline could repair what was wrong with me." He took a difficult breath, "But now I realize I am not broken. I am just carrying something heavy, and I do not know how to set it down. Seeing you, how you teach and how you live, showed me the truth. The burden does not go away. You just learn how to carry it better." Lorelei met his eyes. "The burden never goes away," So how do you live with it? How do you get up and face the day? You find a purpose. You find something to protect, even if it is small. Like teaching 5 people how to shoot better, Tyler added, his voice thick with feeling. Is that why you started teaching? To find a new mission? Lorelei looked around the range. She saw the steel targets, the empty shells, and Garrett's box of donuts. She saw the small team forming around her, sharing a skill she had held in isolation for so long. I got tired of having nothing to protect. The admission seemed to cost her dearly. Her shoulders tightened. Her hand flew to her bracelet, and a faint tremor ran through her before she controlled it. Sarah stepped closer. Chief, is it all right if I ask about your bracelet? Lorelei's eyes fell to her wrist. It was a worn green paracord bracelet, knotted by a hand that was long gone. It belonged to someone who did not come home. Beirut, Panama. Her tone was absolute. That subject is closed. End of story. The discussion was over. Sarah nodded and stepped back, understanding that some memories were private. Lorelei glanced at her watch. 10:47. We are losing the light. One final string of shots each, then we pack it up. They went back to the firing line. But as they started shooting again, the atmosphere was different. They were not just a teacher and her students anymore. They were a unit. They saw her now, not just as an expert, but as the legend she truly was. She was the type of soldier other soldiers spoke of in whispers, a living legend whose real story was locked away for 75 years. Tyler squeezed off his final shots. All 5 rounds hit a 6-inch circle at 300 yards. It wasn't perfect, but it was definite progress. Change came in small victories. Better. Hearing that single word from Lorelei felt better than a medal. A smile crept across Tyler's face. By 11:15, the range was quiet. Brass was collected, targets were down, and gear was stowed. The shooters lingered by their trucks, knowing something important had just happened, but not knowing what to call it. Lorelei slid her rifle case into her own truck. Garrett's old coffee cup sat on a bench. As she picked it up to toss it, she saw the name written on its side. It was not her name. It was a name she had not laid eyes on in 23 years. Her hand froze completely. The cup started to shake. Chief. Tyler had walked up right behind her without a single sound. It was the first time in memory anyone had ever gotten that close to her undetected. The thought was deeply unsettling. Are you okay? She dropped the cup in the trash and spun to face him. I am fine. You do not look fine, I said. I am fine. The edge in her voice was so sharp it could have cut steel. Tyler stepped back, putting his hands up in a gesture of peace. Lorelei let out a long, slow breath, forcing her shoulders to relax. Sorry, that was just old training. It is okay. I get it. You do not, but I appreciate the sentiment. She got into her truck and turned the key. Tyler knocked on her window. She rolled it down. We are coming back next week, same time. Lorelei hesitated, her gaze drifting from the empty range to the distant mountains, then to Tyler's hopeful face. Thursday, at 0600, do not be late. She drove off before he could answer. In her mirror, she saw them gathered together, already making plans, already becoming a team. The walls she had built around herself were starting to crumble. The weight she had carried alone for so long was finally starting to lighten. The ranch house was exactly as she had left it. Her bed was made with flawless, military-tight corners. A knife in the kitchen sat at a perfect 90-degree angle on the cutting board. Her coffee mug was positioned precisely 2 inches from the sink. Still, something felt wrong. The rifle case was on her dining table, not locked away in the closet. The footlocker in her bedroom seemed to be pulling her toward it. She stood before it for 5 whole minutes, her fingers resting on the combination lock, feeling the familiar numbers. She had never bothered to reset the code. She could not possibly forget it. It was 3 numbers that held a lifetime of secrets, of proof, and the only sign she ever existed in places the world pretends are not real. The lock clicked open. She lifted the lid. The hinges moaned after so many years of silence. Inside were the artifacts from a life she could never talk about, arranged with perfect neatness. There was a Navy SEAL trident pin, its shine gone, worn down by things it was never meant to face. Her fingers traced the eagle, the anchor, the trident, and the pistol. It was a symbol of service that people recognized, but whose true cost they could never understand. There were photos of teams in desert fatigues and jungle camouflage. In other pictures, they wore street clothes in front of buildings they were never officially near. Every single face was carefully blurred. All patches and names were removed. These were safety measures that you carry past your service, beyond retirement, and even into death. She found a letter, written by hand on official Navy paper. The ink was faded, but the words were still clear. It read, "You were the very best we had." The signature was just an unreadable scribble, by design. Accepting praise was just as dangerous as admitting defeat. Next to it was another paracord bracelet, a perfect match to the one she always wore. This one looked new, almost untouched. It had belonged to someone who never had the chance to break it in. A small fabric name tag was attached. Black letters on white spelled out a name she had not said aloud in 23 years. She picked up the bracelet, holding it next to her own. They were finally a set. It was the first time they had been together since Panama, since a mission that was a success on paper but a failure in spirit. The mission that rescued 12 people at the cost of one. A tremor started in her hand. The shaking moved up her arm to her shoulder, until her entire body trembled. Her iron self-control, held for 7 straight years, finally began to break. A sound ripped from her throat, not a cry or a scream. It was the sound of pure grief, fury, and exhaustion all at once. She collapsed onto the bed, clutching the bracelets, her eyes fixed on the name tag. Tears started falling, one after the other. She did not try to stop them. She just sat in the afternoon sun, weeping for the first time since the funeral she was not allowed to attend. Because officially, there was no loss, no mission, and nobody to mourn. Outside the window, the wind began to howl. Dark clouds rolled in, promising a storm by nightfall. She knew how to read a sky like that from her years in places without weather forecasts, where a change in the wind could mean life or death. That was one skill she never lost. Most parts of that life had stayed with her. She laid the 2 bracelets side by side on the nightstand. The set was incomplete, but it was finally together. She stood and went to the kitchen to make coffee she had no intention of drinking. The simple ritual was a comfort. The familiar motions helped quiet the storm inside her. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she did not know. It was short. It said, "Thank you for this morning. My name is Marcus. Tyler gave me your number. Hope it is okay. I wanted to tell you I slept for 4 straight hours after we met. I have not done that in months. Whatever you are doing is working." She read the message 3 times but did not reply. She had no idea what to say. A new feeling was growing inside her, something she could not quite identify. It might have been a new purpose, or maybe it was connection. A feeling that her own painful past could help others do more than just survive. Then a message from Sarah came. "Chief, thanks for the time on the range. I really needed that. See you Thursday." Then Brock. "I got new scope rings. I will have it zeroed in for next week. I appreciate the honest feedback." Finally, a text arrived from Tyler. "You are making a real difference, Chief. I hope you know that." She put her phone down and stared at it, as if it were a strange device from another planet. People were connecting with her. A team was starting to form around her. Her years of isolation were ending with every new message. Back in her bedroom, the footlocker was still open, its secrets seeing the light of day for the first time in 7 years. The trident pin caught a sunbeam, casting a glint of light on the ceiling. The photos held powerful memories behind their blurry faces. The letter was still there, offering silent praise for a job that officially never happened. And on her nightstand, Two bracelets rested together. One was frayed from years of use. The other was brand new because of loss. They were reunited, but they were not whole. They could never be made whole, but at least they were no longer apart. Lorelei went back to her room. She looked at the bracelets, the open locker, the hidden past she had protected, and the new purpose she was just discovering. She picked up both bracelets. With her other hand, she started to braid them together into one single piece. She used complicated military knots, the kind made to hold under extreme stress in places that would tear weaker things apart. Her fingers moved on their own. The skill was pure instinct, learned 30 years ago and made perfect over time. When she was done, the two bracelets were one solid band. It was thicker and stronger, a blend of her history and her future. She slipped it onto her wrist. It felt heavier, but also perfectly balanced. She closed the lid to the footlocker, but did not lock it. The heavy combination lock sat on the floor, available but no longer needed. In her kitchen, she drank the now cold coffee and watched the storm clouds gather. The rain was coming. The range would be nothing but mud tomorrow. But Thursday was still 3 days away. That was plenty of time for the ground to dry. It was time for her students to practice. And it was time for her to plan their next lesson, the kind that turns shooters into professionals. Her phone buzzed one more time. It was Garrett. He wrote, "I saw you on the range this morning. It reminded me of why I opened this range in the first place. Thank you for being here." She looked at the message, put the phone down, and picked up her empty mug. She washed it, dried it, and set it exactly 2 inches from the edge of the sink. Outside, the first drops of rain began to hit the roof. The sound was like distant gunfire. Her training kicked in instantly. Her muscles tensed, her senses sharpened. Her hand automatically went for a weapon that was not there. Then, she pulled herself back. She was not in Beirut or Panama. She was not in any of the dozen other places where rain meant danger was coming. She was in Montana, building a new life from the ashes of a past that was never supposed to exist. A storm gathers as thunder echoes in the distance. She observes it from her window, a hand covering the woven band on her wrist. In its knots, she feels her past and present tied together, a grief that will never fade. But now, for the first time, that sorrow seems to have a meaning. We all know quiet heroes like her, people who carry immense burdens without ever complaining. They are the unsung foundation for so many, but their own stories remain untold. If this reminds you of someone in your life, please share this. And if you think these forgotten legacies deserve a voice, subscribe to our channel. We are here to tell the stories of people like Lorelei Byrne, who helped shape our world from the shadows. Her Thursday training sessions ran through the summer and into the autumn. After just 6 weeks, complete beginners became confident marksmen. Her class grew from 5 people to 8, and then to 12. Veterans from 3 different states came to learn, lured by whispers on forums and at gatherings. The secret was out. Chief Byrne was teaching again. The legendary instructor, long thought to be a myth, was real. By mid-October, the air at 0600 was cold enough to see your own breath, and a thin layer of ice covered the target stands. Lorelei showed up every morning at 0545. Her movements were smooth as she set up the targets, a display of lifelong discipline. She handled a Remington 700, a rifle Garrett had given her after she helped design it. Her initials were engraved in places only she would ever see. Tyler arrived at 0557, with Marcus, Sarah, and 10 more right behind him, their pickup trucks parked in perfect alignment. The veterans got out with their equipment and coffee, connected by a silent understanding of the weights they all carried. Lorelei walked them through the core skills they had refined for 6 weeks: breath management, trigger control, and how to estimate range without any tools. She concentrated on the essential disciplines that separate a true sharpshooter from an amateur. Her calm, firm voice traveled across the range, commanding their attention. When she talked, they listened to every syllable. When she demonstrated a method, they watched with an intensity that came from high-stakes experience. At roughly 7:37, an unfamiliar vehicle drove up. It was a black sport utility vehicle, not a truck, and it had official government plates. The engine idled for 2 minutes, then went quiet. 2 men got out. They wore suits under tactical vests, had sharp haircuts, and carried themselves with the clear authority of federal agents. Tyler was the first one to see them. He said in a low voice, "Chief, we have company." Lorelei had already spotted the vehicle, but did not turn. She kept her focus on guiding Sarah through a 600-yard shot. The men approached slowly, keeping their hands in view, their posture casual but alert. One was older, maybe in his late 50s, with gray hair at his temples. The other was about 35 and looked intense. The older man stopped, about 15 feet from her. He waited for her to acknowledge him, which she did without delay. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. "You are retired Chief Petty Officer Byrne," the man stated. "I am aware," she replied. "My name is Coleman." "This is Agent Harris," Coleman continued. "We are with the Naval Special Warfare Command. We are compiling a history of the first integration programs." Lorelei's jaw clenched. A small muscle twitched near her ear. "That is classified information," she said, her voice like steel. "The files are being reviewed for public release. We are speaking with everyone who served between 1979 and 2001. "I have no comment," she replied. "We are not asking for mission specifics," he said, "just to verify your service dates and assignments." "It is still classified," she repeated. Coleman took a step nearer while Harris stood back, observing. The shooters had all put down their rifles. The entire range was now listening. "Chief Byrne, you have been out here for 6 weeks," Coleman said. "Information gets out. A female SEAL instructor in Montana is a significant story. In our circle, news spreads very fast." "Then our circle needs to learn to stay quiet," she replied sharply. Tyler moved to stand closer to her. "Chief, what is happening?" Lorelei kept her eyes locked on Coleman. "This does not involve you. Return to the firing line." "With all respect, ma'am," Tyler said. "They are asking about your service. That involves all of us. Stand down, Tyler," she ordered. Her voice was pure ice. Tyler took a step back but held his ground. The others moved in behind him, creating a silent wall of solidarity. Coleman's face softened. "Chief, we did not come here to make trouble. The Navy wants to give you official recognition for your service. There is going to be a ceremony at Dam Neck. A few of the first female operators will be honored for their contributions." Lorelei's hand instinctively went to her wrist. Her fingers closed around the 2 paracord bracelets, drawing strength from them. Her past and present were woven into those cords. "No, sir," she said firmly. "I did not serve to get a medal. I served because it was the right thing to do. Recognition was not the deal then, and it is not the deal now. Times are different," Coleman insisted. "The Navy wants to honor what you did." "The Navy can honor me by leaving me in peace," she said. It was Marcus who spoke next, his voice even. "Chief, maybe you ought to hear what they have to say." Lorelei finally turned to look at her students. All 12 of them stood together, a team in a way she was just now seeing. "You have no clue what you are asking of me," she told them. "We know you did something important," Marcus said. "We know you gave up things we can't even imagine. That kind of duty should be honored, if you want it or not." Sarah stepped forward. "Chief, for 6 weeks you taught us the mission is bigger than our feelings. You said doing what is right is more important than doing what is easy. Maybe this is the mission now." Lorelei was speechless. His logic was airtight, but flawless reasoning could not eliminate the risk of coming out of the shadows after so many years. It did not account for the secret promises she had made or the peace she had earned by being invisible. Coleman took a folder out of his jacket. There were photos inside. He held them out for Lorelei. They were black and white pictures from the 1980s and 1990s, showing training drills and mission briefs. A much younger Lorelei was clearly visible in 3 of the images. It was her without a doubt. These are being entered into the official archives, Coleman said. Your past is about to be made public. So it is not a matter of if this story comes out, he said to her. The only question is, do you tell it, or does someone else? Lorelei's breathing became shallow, a clear sign she was suppressing her emotions. Who else is in these photographs? She demanded. People whose families approved it, and those who are gone with no family left to ask. The second bracelet on her arm, the name in her old trunk, the man who never came back from Panama. His name would be spoken at last. His sacrifice would be known. Lorelei had to decide if that public honor was worth her private pain. Tyler came to stand directly beside her. Chief, he said, whatever you choose, we are right here with you. Marcus moved to her other side. You taught us how to deal with the tough things. We will deal with this together. One by one, the other shooters formed a loose circle around Lorelei. It was not a cage. It was a shield of support. It was the proof that she was not by herself anymore. The family she had built here was real. Lorelei's eyes moved from Coleman to the pictures, and then to the students who now surrounded her with their loyalty. When she finally spoke, her words were quiet but strong. If I participate in this ceremony, I have conditions. Name them, Coleman answered. The fallen will be honored with the highest possible respect. They will be given full military honors, and their families will be notified with dignity. Nothing political. Done, Coleman said, and my people will be there. She nodded in the direction of the 12 shooters. Coleman studied the veterans who had formed a tight circle around a woman they barely knew but trusted with everything. We can arrange for that, he said. Lorelei gave a short, single nod. In that case, I will consider it. I will need your decision by Friday, Coleman told her. You will have it. He offered her a card. This is my contact number. And Chief, I sincerely mean this. Thank you. For what you did then, and for what you're doing now. It all matters. He and Harris went back to their vehicle and drove off. A heavy silence settled on the range. Tyler was the first to talk. Chief, are you actually going to do this? I am not sure, she admitted. She returned to her position, brought up her rifle, and put 3 perfect shots into a 700-yard target. Her movements were flawless, sharpened over 30 years. Breathe in, breathe out, squeeze the trigger. It was how she made the world make sense. Her students resumed their places. The lesson began again, but the atmosphere had changed. The private woman they knew was about to become a public figure, facing a kind of exposure she had always worked to avoid. That night, Lorelei was in her kitchen, gazing at Coleman's business card. On the table were the artifacts of a life lived in secret, her trident pin, old pictures of hazy faces, and an award for service that officially never took place. And on a small piece of fabric was a name she had not said in 23 years. She picked up her phone and dialed the number Tyler had provided. He answered on the first ring. Tyler here. Tyler, it's Lorelei. Chief, is everything all right? I need your thoughts on something. Of course, anything. If you could give honor to a fallen comrade, someone whose sacrifice was a state secret, would you do it? Even if it meant giving up everything? A long, heavy silence filled the space between them. Tyler's voice came through, filled with emotion. Yes, absolutely, with no hesitation at all, even if it means revealing things you have kept secret? Especially then, he confirmed, because that story has to be told. If you are the one to tell it, that is not a burden. It is an honor. Lorelei shut her eyes. Thank you, Tyler. Who is this for? He asked softly. It is for someone, she replied, who deserved more than a secret file and a fading memory. She ended the conversation, picked up the name tag, and traced the letters with her finger. Her mind was made up. On Friday morning, she phoned Coleman and confirmed she would be there. She gave him the name on the tag, requesting full honors for a soldier who died in Panama during a mission that never officially happened. Coleman assured her it would be done. He said the process would not be easy, but the honor would be official and proper. 2 months later, Lorelei stood in a dress blue uniform she had not put on in 23 years. The fit was still perfect. Her trident pin was polished and secured in its rightful place. Under her cuff, on her right wrist, the paracord bracelets felt unfamiliar. Their weight seemed correct, finally complete. The ceremony was held at Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek in Virginia. It was a small and dignified event. 20 of the very first female operators were recognized for 40 years of uncredited service. Their families were in attendance, along with the current SEAL Command. Only official Navy photographers were allowed in. Lorelei's entire team had made the journey to be there. All 12 of them sat in the audience, dressed in their best attempt at formal clothing. Tyler's suit was a little tight. Marcus had a fresh haircut, a clear sign he took this seriously. Sarah's dress was lovely but looked uncomfortable. They were there because she had asked them to come. Those 6 months of Thursday morning sessions had forged a bond that was much deeper than any typical classroom. The commander of Naval Special Warfare Command gave a speech. He admitted that history has missing pieces, that incredible acts were performed by people whose names were never recorded. He announced it was time to fix that, in a small but important way. The women were called to the stage, one after another. Each one was presented with a formal citation. Each received 30 seconds of public recognition for careers spent entirely out of sight. When Lorelei's name was called, she walked to the podium as if she had practiced it in her mind 1,000 times, but never once said it aloud. Chief Petty Officer Lorelei Byrne. She served on active duty from 1979 to 2001. Her service record contained numerous classified operations in places such as Beirut, Panama, and on 3 different continents. She was the head instructor for advanced marksmanship. She was an evaluator for new weapon systems. She served as a consultant for training methods that are still being used today. The citation continued. Every word was carefully chosen to respect her service without disclosing national secrets, to give her recognition without compromising missions. When he finished reading, the commanding officer attached a medal to her uniform. It was not one of the awards she received for secret missions. Those would remain classified for another 50 years. This medal, however, was an admission that she had served, that her work was significant, and that it had helped shape the force into what it is today. She gave a sharp salute. He returned it. She stepped back. But then, something unexpected occurred. Tyler stood up and started to applaud. Marcus followed, then Sarah, and then her whole team. Soon, other people in the audience who did not know her began to clap, understanding the deep importance of the moment. The applause grew louder, changing from polite respect to a powerful wave of sincere admiration. Lorelei's jaw clenched. Her eyes became slightly moist. She did not cry or lose her composure, but a small part of the rigid self-control she always had seemed to melt away. Later, during the reception, Lorelei's team gathered around her. She was never at ease being the focus of attention, but she handled it. Garrett showed up, having driven all the way from Montana. He handed her a coffee in a paper cup, just like he did at the shooting range months ago. "This looks right on you, Chief." The uniform, the recognition. She took a drink of the coffee. It was awful, like all coffee on a military installation. She realized she had missed it. An older woman then walked up to her. She was in her late 70s and moved carefully, but with a clear sense of purpose. She stood right in front of Lorelei and studied her face. "You were in Beirut." The words were a declaration, not an inquiry. Lorelei gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "My name is Margaret Chen. My son was at the barracks. He was a Marine. He was rescued from the debris by someone his friends said was a female operator. They claimed she came out of nowhere, took control of the medical response, and then vanished before anyone learned her name." Lorelei felt her breath stop in her throat. The bombing at the barracks was pure chaos. There were hundreds of injured, and rescue crews were everywhere. She could remember pulling men from twisted steel and concrete. She could remember the blood, the dense smoke, and the desperate cries for assistance. She recalled working until her hands were raw and her uniform was ruined. I cannot be sure if I was that person. Margaret's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. My son is alive because a person knew exactly what to do, because someone stayed calm when everything was falling apart. He is alive today. He has 3 kids and is now a paramedic. And for 40 years, he has wondered who saved him, so he could finally offer his thanks. She held out a photograph of a young Marine in his dress blue uniform. Then she showed another photo of the same man, now older, with his family, his face radiating life and joy. Lorelei took the picture. She studied the man's face but did not recognize him. It was impossible to recall any single person from that horrific day. But she remembered the task. She remembered her mission. She remembered doing everything she could to save people from what should have been their final resting place. I am just happy he returned home. Margaret gently took Lorelei's hand. Thank you. For my son. For every single one of them. For doing what you did when no one was there to see and no one would ever know. Those words shattered something deep within her. The final wall she had built around her heart at last collapsed. Lorelei's eyes welled up. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She made no move to wipe it away. Tyler appeared beside her. Chief, someone else wants to talk to you. He pointed to a man in his 60s who was wearing a naval officer's uniform. His face looked familiar, but older. It took Lorelei 3 seconds. Then the realization hit her with physical intensity. The man came closer and held out his hand. Chief Byrne. It has been a very long time. Commander Parsons. He was a retired captain now. He offered a friendly smile. I was stationed at Bragg in 2001. You led the advanced shooting class. You completely transformed how I thought about marksmanship. I remember you, she replied. He went on. I later became the training manager for 3 different SEAL teams. I used your techniques and trained hundreds of operators. Every single one of them was a better shooter because of what you taught me. He paused, looking directly into her eyes. You saved lives, Chief. Not just in Beirut or Panama, but with every operator who came home safely because you made them better, faster, and more composed under fire. That is your true legacy, whether you realize it or not. Lorelei found herself unable to speak. All of her feelings were exposed. All she could do was nod. Parsons gave her a crisp salute. She returned it with equal precision. He then turned and walked away, leaving her there with her team, surrounded by people whose lives she had affected in ways she was only now beginning to grasp. The reception lasted another hour. Lorelei chatted with the other women who were honored and met their families. She received thanks from strangers whose family members were still alive because of her actions. The enormous weight she had carried on her shoulders for decades finally started to lift. It was not completely gone, but now it was shared. On the flight back to Montana, Tyler sat in the seat beside her. She was quiet, just watching the clouds drift by below them. Are you all right, Chief? He asked. I'm not certain yet. That was a lot to take in, she agreed. Do you have any regrets about going? He inquired. No. I was afraid I might, but I do not. Good, he replied, and then paused. So, what is next for you? The same as always. Thursday mornings, 6 o'clock training. So nothing has changed? He asked. Everything has changed, she replied, but the work goes on. The plane touched down in Montana close to midnight. Lorelei drove home through the darkness, her headlights carving a path on the mountain roads. The ranch house looked just as she had left it, but when she walked inside, the feeling of the space was different. The old footlocker in her bedroom was now sitting open. Its contents were no longer hidden away. The trident pin was now on the fireplace mantel, placed beside old team photos and new pictures of her students at the range. Her past was at last living in harmony with her present. She got out of her dress blues. For too long, her incredible service remained a state secret, her sacrifices locked away in classified files. This is the story of a hero who was invisible for decades and how sharing the weight she carried alone gave her a new reason to live. If you believe good people deserve to be recognized, please share her journey. She placed her dress uniform in the closet, not to be forgotten, but to be ready. The woven bracelets came off her wrist, set down beside her name tag for a night of rest. After making some coffee, she stood by the kitchen window, watching the stars appear over the dark mountains. Her phone glowed with a new message. Marcus wrote that her presence meant everything to him. Sarah called her a true inspiration. Tyler said it was an honor to be her student. She read their words, unable to type a response, feeling an overwhelming wave of gratitude and peace. She was learning that a burden shared openly is far lighter than one carried in secret. Thursday arrived with a crisp, clear chill in the air. Lorelei was at the shooting range by 5:45 in the morning, arranging targets with practiced ease. The work was a familiar and comforting rhythm. She followed the same drills she had for months, but something felt different. The weight on her soul was less heavy, now spread among many instead of being held by her alone. Trucks started pulling in at 5:57. It was Tyler, Marcus, Sarah, and 10 other regulars. This morning, however, was unusual. 4 new vehicles arrived, bringing 8 unfamiliar faces. They were veterans who heard about the ceremony and had traveled across Montana to meet her. They approached her with a quiet sense of respect. A woman in her 40s, with the bearing of an Air Force officer, was the first to talk. "Chief Byrne? My name is retired Captain Rodriguez. I flew missions using targeting systems you helped develop. It would be an absolute honor to learn from you." Lorelei looked over the expanded group. There were now 20 shooters, more than she had planned for, but it was precisely what these mornings had become, a community united by a shared purpose. "Get your rifles ready on the line," she commanded. "We will start in 5 minutes." The training went on until noon, lasting longer than normal to accommodate the new members. Lorelei moved between them with patient skill, fixing a stance or adjusting someone's breathing with equal attention for all. A brand new shooter received the same dedication as a longtime regular. During a short break, Garrett arrived with more coffee and sandwiches for the group. He set out the food and stood beside Lorelei as the others relaxed. "This is something special you have here, Chief," he said softly. "It is about more than hitting a target. You are creating a family, passing on your knowledge, and giving them a mission." He gestured toward the others. "Just look at them. They are not just practicing their aim. They are learning from someone they truly respect. Someone with skill, focus, and an unbreakable spirit." "That means a lot," Garrett concluded. Lorelei watched her students. Tyler was helping a newcomer adjust their scope. Marcus showed the correct way to get into a prone position. Sarah explained to a young man how to read the wind. The knowledge was being passed from one person to the next. The group was becoming a stronger unit. The mission continued. Later in the day, Lorelei sat at her table with photographs spread before her. Old pictures from a long-sealed trunk lay beside new ones from that morning. She put them in chronological order, watching her life unfold from a covert operative to a solitary veteran, and now to this new role she had yet to name. She chose 2 specific photos and placed them next to each other. The left one showed her unit from 1997, their faces obscured by desert gear, filled with the confident courage of youth on missions that secretly shaped the world. The photo on the right was her new team, 20 shooters, with clear and smiling faces under the Montana sun, forming a new kind of family. The 2 halves of her life were no longer separated by a wall. Her choice to teach and be seen had finally closed the distance. She placed both pictures on her mantle, giving them equal importance. In the middle, she set her trident pin. It stood for the duty that defined her and the price that had shaped her. She slid the connected paracord bracelets back onto her wrist. Their combined weight felt right. Her fingers grazed them absently as she prepared a meal and cleaned a weapon. As evening settled over Montana, she drank her coffee and looked at the mantle. It was proof of a life that was finally in the light. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she did not recognize. "Chief Byrne, Commander Walsh, Naval Special Warfare." We would like to discuss you advising on new training protocols. The message on her screen was a single word. Interested. Her eyes scanned it again, weighing the consequences. Answering would mean stepping back into the life she had walked away from 23 years ago. It was a choice to leave the shadows behind. She typed a simple reply. Send the details. I will review them. The work never truly ends. The mission changes, but the rules stay the same. Skill, focus, and unwavering duty. She moved to the fireplace mantel, her fingers gently tracing the photos of faces from her past and her present. Her two separate lives were finally connected, a decision she made to accept her history instead of hiding from it. It became clear to her that some sacrifices demand acknowledgement, particularly for those who never sought any praise. Outside, the first stars began to dot the night sky. She recognized them as the same stars that had guided her on missions over 3 different continents, the constellations she relied on when technology failed. They were constant and true. She returned to her seat and picked up 2 bracelets, holding them gently. The first one was hers. The second belonged to a teammate who had not returned. They symbolized a powerful bond, a deep loss, and the harsh truth that some missions require the ultimate payment. But they also represented survival and the strength to continue forward. They were a promise to share what she knew, so that others might carry the burden more easily. Thursday would come again, as it always did. 6 in the morning at the Ridgeline Range. 20 shooters would be there, maybe even more. The family was growing, and Lorelei Byrne, a woman who had lived in darkness for so long, was finally visible in a way that mattered. Not for medals or praise, but because the mission required it. Because knowledge is useless when it remains hidden. And because her students deserved to learn from someone who had endured it all and survived to share what was real. She set the bracelets down, her gaze resting on the photos one last time. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. The feeling was new, but real. The weight was still there, but now it was shared among many. That made all the difference. A profound quiet settled over the house. At 5:30 the next morning, she would get up, make her bed with perfect corners, and do 100 push-ups. She would drink her coffee, while looking at the images that were no longer concealed. Her routine had not changed, but the crushing loneliness had disappeared forever. In 3 days, on a range in Montana, 20 veterans will gather to learn from a person they admire, a leader with skill, grit, and an unbreakable spirit. Chief Petty Officer Lorelei Byrne, retired, and finally acknowledged. She is out of the shadows for good, still teaching, still serving, and still carrying a weight made lighter because it is shared. If her story moved you, and if you know a veteran who served in silence, please forward this to them. Let them know their service was seen, and their duty meant more than any official record could ever show. And if you believe that these stories of quiet heroism deserve to be heard, we ask you to subscribe. There are more stories like this one, waiting for their moment. There are more legacies that need to be honored. And there is more truth that needs to be brought into the light.